So the day finally arrived when the judgment was issued. Big fat envelope arrived, inside with all the legal documents, the judgment. I started reading through it. It was a pretty good start. It said Mr. Lund had been unfairly dismissed. I mean, nobody could argue that. There was no process, there was no disciplinary. We were hijacked at the meeting, the so-called meeting. But then further down it said, we have decided that Mr. Lund made a substantial contribution to his own dismissal because of his conduct. And as a result of that, we are reducing his claim for compensation by 2/3, 66%. Which came as a little bit of a shock, I must admit. They said about I was deliberately using the computers in a way that would make them fail. I was doing this because I was conducting a rearguard action in order to get Apple Macintosh computers. They said that I had deliberately left classes on several occasions, and they said I had become alienated from my colleagues, many of whom didn't want to work with me, which was an expression I'd seen already before on some of the school's documents. So that was that. They also said that I had applied for an uplift. You can apply for a 10% uplift or a 15% uplift if you're sacked without any process. And the school had claimed, or the school lawyers had claimed, because they said they were sacking me for some other substantial reason, this didn't apply. That's some sort of legal technicality, even though the school originally said they were sacking me for some other substantial reason, or failing that serious misconduct, or saving that gross misconduct. But obviously the some other substantial reason didn't allow this levy to be imposed on them. So that was that. And obviously that came as rather a shock to me. I couldn't see how Judge Sutton and his colleagues could possibly have come to those conclusions. And if you read through the judgment, there's not any evidence anywhere of any of the documents I submitted, like the IT report, for example, which was quite important. There was no evidence of any of the answers I elicited from any of the witnesses. There was nothing that Dr. Ashby, Lynn Ashby said, was mentioned at all. It was as if I hadn't been there, actually. In fact, it was almost as if we hadn't had the hearing. They just read the witness statements and gone on the side of the ones with the most witness statements. So that was pretty shocking, to say the least. So I went online and looked at the website, what can you do about this? And you can apply for something called a review if you're not happy, or other information has come to light or something. You can ask them to review their decision. It's sort of halfway between asking for a review and getting what's the other thing called? I can't remember, doesn't matter. Anyway, so I decided to apply to get them to review the judgment. I must just digress a little bit here, because one of the things, because there were actually something else came to light. When I was sacked from the school, my email accounts were suspended. Obviously I didn't have access to any documents or anything like that. And I applied to the school to have it reinstated, and there was a big fuss about it. And in the end I did it through Freedom of Information Commissioner's office, and they told me the form of which to write, and I think they contacted them actually. Anyway, they released a great wodge of papers, but when I looked through, there was it's meant to be everything that's written down about me and everything that's recorded about me with my name on it. And there was no correspondence between the deputies and the head or Anne Williamson or anything like that in there. And you know, it couldn't have all been done word of mouth with nothing recorded. Anyway, so I got back to them again and said, you know, I have reason to believe that there is stuff missing out of this. And again, they kicked up about it. I got in touch with the ICO again, and they put the pressure on the school and said, we'll prosecute you for withholding information or whatever. And eventually they released another great big pile of stuff. And I think it was, I don't know, a week or two before the hearing, the original hearing. And when I looked through it, it was just photocopies of the stuff they'd already sent me, as far as I could see. Anyway, when I applied for this review, I went back over that stuff, and hidden in a pile, you know, hidden in the middle of it somewhere on a sheet with a couple of other things, there was an email from Kathy Lloyd as she was then. I think it was to the bursar and to the head, saying, and it was just before Easter, the year I was suspended, and it said, you know, the problems we're having is because the equipment isn't being properly configured and this sort of stuff, and she said it's vital that Mr. Lund has his stuff ready. You know, he's suffered long enough. It's vital that he should have this for the beginning of next term after Easter. And as you know, nothing happened about that. Anyway, so I'd found that new piece of evidence. And the other thing I'd done is I'd gone to have a chat with a guy I used to work with, an IT guy, and he, this is when I was at the Nottage, and he'd gone onwards and upwards, and he was quite a big noise in Kent County Council. He was an advisor, and I talked to him about it. He agreed to talk to me about it, and he said he'd never heard anything like it. He said if a system fails once or twice a year, he'd be worried about it, and he said to blame the user for the failure of the system is absolutely ridiculous, because if it's set up properly, it should be impervious to anything that a user does. You know, and he said that, you know, Windows is used all over the world for financial stuff and cash machines and all sorts of stuff, and he said, you know, it's got to be immune from user interference. So that's what he said. Anyway, when I thought I can report this as well, so we duly turned up at the ET place in Ashford again. So this was to see whether I could have a review. It was a hearing to see whether I was entitled to review. And, you know, I questioned various things. You know, I said, you know, you've said I made a substantial contribution. I was talking to the judge at this point, obviously. You said I made a substantial contribution to my sacking. Yeah, I didn't have any disciplinary action taken against me. I mean, surely if my conduct is bad enough to get me sacked, it would have, you know, elicited at least a verbal warning or something, and it didn't. I said, you said that I was fighting a rearguard action for Apple, but there's nothing anywhere where I've said I was demanding Apple computers. You know, I preferred them for reasons which I'd stated at great length during the hearing, because, you know, they didn't go wrong and we could support them ourselves. And I said about, you know, the only things that, you know, I'd provided, you know, I'd said we couldn't have had Apples, especially in the second, well, when they came to do when Nicholson pitched up, because we'd already invested in this stuff for the other computers. And I said, I can't believe what you're saying about me deliberately making the computers go wrong when, you know, the IT report says everybody in the school was suffering the same fate. And as for the thing about being alienated from the staff, nobody, you know, there wasn't a single named person who to corroborate that. I can't see how you can come to that just because they said it. Anyway, so that was that. And I said about what Peter said about the computers, and he said, well, why hasn't he come in person? Why wouldn't he give evidence? And I said, well, because it's self-evident, really. You know, you're sitting with a computer in front of you now. You know, click on it, type something in, make it crash. You can't do it because it's been properly configured. And I said about the thing from Kathy, and he said, did you have this in your possession at the time of the first hearing? I said, yes, I did. And I explained what had happened about the 2 releases of all these piles of stuff, and I said I missed it. And he said, because it was in your possession, you should have used it in the first instance. it's not admissible. You can't bring it up now. You know, what did he say? He said you just want a second bite of the cherry. I said, well, yeah, I suppose I do really. I can't think there's anything wrong with that. Anyway, that was that. And that's how it ended. And I can't remember whether it was actually said then and there, because obviously the school were dead against it. I can't even remember what they said about it. I think it was the same guy. Or it might have been the legal girl. I can't remember what her name was now. One of the lawyers. But anyway, she said a few things there. Oh, and the other thing I said about the uplift, and they said it's some substantial reason, it doesn't account. So that was that. End of story. And as I say, I don't know whether they came to the judgment there, or if it came a little while later. A little while later in by post. It was certainly confirmed by post. But basically it said no, you can't have another review. So I was left with the amount of money I got was about equivalent to just under a year's salary in the end. And by this time I'd been out of work for over a year. I had no review, I had no job, no career, and no justice, I would argue.